When CEO Victoria Cross destroyed Daniel Hayes in that boardroom, she never imagined she'd be begging at his door 12 hours later. Tonight, as lightning splits the Texas sky and her car dies on a flooded road, the Ice Queen finds herself clutching her terrified son, standing soaked on the porch of the man she just humiliated. One storm rages outside, another burns between them. Will pride triumph, or will desperation force two wounded souls to find shelter in each other? Stay with me until the end to see how far this storm takes them, and comment your city so I can see how far this story has traveled across the world. The boardroom at Innovatech felt like a gladiator's arena, all polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the sprawling Texas landscape. But Daniel Hayes wasn't admiring the view. He stood at the head of the conference table, his hands steady despite the tremor in his voice, as he presented what he believed could revolutionize their renewable energy division. The solar integration model I'm proposing could increase efficiency by 30% while reducing costs by... Mr. Hayes. The voice cut through his presentation like a blade through silk. Victoria Cross, newly appointed CEO of Innovatech, didn't even look up from her tablet as she spoke. Her fingers moved across the screen with mechanical precision, each tap somehow audible in the sudden silence. This is exactly the kind of outdated thinking that's been holding this company back. Daniel's mouth went dry. Around the table, 12 department heads shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between him and their new leader. Victoria finally raised her gaze, and Daniel felt the full force of those steel-gray eyes that had earned her the whispered nickname, Ice Queen, throughout the corporate world. You're suggesting we pour millions into technology that's already being outpaced by competitors. She continued, her voice devoid of warmth. It's quaint, really. Like proposing we invest in typewriters because they're reliable. Heat crept up Daniel's neck. He'd spent 3 months perfecting this proposal, working late into countless nights after putting his 6-year-old daughter Emma to bed. With respect, Ms. Cross, if you'd look at the projected returns, I've seen enough. Victoria's manicured fingers drummed once against the table, a sound that somehow managed to convey both dismissal and disdain. This company needs vision, not nostalgia wrapped in spreadsheets. We're done here. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Daniel felt every pair of eyes in the room boring into him, witnessing his professional execution. His colleague Margaret Chen, who'd encouraged him to pursue this project, couldn't even meet his gaze. The marketing director studied his coffee cup as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Meeting adjourned, Victoria announced, already gathering her materials. Mr. Hayes, please see me in my office in 10 minutes. The rest of you, I expect the quarterly projections on my desk by 5. The room emptied with unusual haste, leaving Daniel standing alone at the presentation screen that still displayed his carefully crafted charts and graphs. 3 months of work reduced to digital ash in 15 minutes. He made his way to Victoria's corner office, each step feeling heavier than the last. Through the glass walls, he could see her on a phone call, gesturing sharply as she spoke. When she finally waved him in, her expression was unreadable. "Close the door," she said without looking up from her computer. Daniel complied, taking the chair across from her imposing desk. The office was immaculate. No family photos, no personal touches, just awards and degrees arranged with military precision. A crystal sculpture caught the afternoon light, casting fragmented rainbows across the white walls. "Mr. Hayes," Victoria began, finally giving him her full attention. "Your employment file makes for interesting reading. MIT graduate, top of your class. Impressive track record at your previous firm, which makes today's presentation all the more disappointing." "I believe in this project," Daniel said quietly. "The technology is sound, The market research supports. The market research is 18 months old. Victoria's interruption was surgical in its precision. In the renewable energy sector that might as well be from the Jurassic period. You're thinking like an engineer when you need to think like a business leader. Daniel's jaw tightened. I am thinking like a business leader. One who believes in sustainable growth over quick profits. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, surprise perhaps, or irritation. Sustainable growth requires staying ahead of the curve, not clinging to comfortable solutions. This company was bleeding money when I arrived. I wasn't brought in to play it safe. And I wasn't hired to abandon my principles. Daniel shot back immediately, regretting the words as they left his mouth. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria leaned back in her chair, studying him with the calculating gaze of a chess master contemplating her next move. Principles. She repeated the word, carrying a weight of mockery. How refreshingly naive. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, what exactly do you think happens to principals when quarterly reports show red ink and shareholders start demanding explanations? I think, Daniel said carefully, that companies who sacrifice long-term vision for short-term gains usually end up as cautionary tales in business school textbooks. For a moment, Victoria said nothing. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, turning the Texas sky an ominous shade of gray. The first rumble of thunder rolled across the landscape like a distant warning. You're passionate, Victoria finally acknowledged. I'll give you that. But passion without pragmatism is just expensive idealism. I'm restructuring the renewable division. Your position will be reevaluated. The euphemism hit Daniel like a physical blow. In corporate speak, reevaluated was just a polite way of saying eliminated. He thought of Emma, of the mortgage payments, of the carefully budgeted life he'd built for them after Sarah's death. I see, he said, proud that his voice remained steady. And when might this reevaluation be complete? Soon. Victoria's attention had already returned to her computer screen. HR will be in touch. That's all. Daniel stood slowly, his hands clenched at his sides. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, Ms. Cross, I hope your vision includes room for the people who built this company. They deserve better than to be dismissed as outdated thinking. He didn't wait for a response. The drive home took him through the heart of small-town Texas, past the diner where he and Emma shared pancakes every Saturday morning, past the library where Sarah used to volunteer, past the elementary school, where Emma was learning to read with the same fierce determination her mother had possessed. Everything familiar suddenly felt fragile, threatened by forces beyond his control. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the first fat raindrops were splattering against his windshield. The modest two-story house welcomed him with warm yellow light spilling from the kitchen windows. Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor who watched Emma after school, waved from the front porch. "Storm's coming in fast," she called out. "Emma's been watching for you through the window for the past hour." "Thanks, Mrs. Patterson. I'll get her inside before it hits." The front door burst open before he could reach for his keys. Emma launched herself into his arms with the unrestrained joy that only 6-year-olds possessed, her dark curls bouncing as she peppered him with questions about his day. "Daddy, Daddy, Mrs. Patterson made cookies, and I only ate 2 because you said I have to save room for dinner. And we read about knights and dragons, and did you know that some dragons are actually nice and just misunderstood?" Daniel swept her up, inhaling the sweet scent of strawberry shampoo and chocolate chip cookies. For a moment, the weight of the day lifted from his shoulders. This was what mattered, not boardrooms or balance sheets, but the giggling little girl in his arms who looked at him like he could move mountains. 2 whole cookies, he said with mock seriousness. I'm not sure dinner can compete with that. I saved room, Emma protested, patting her stomach. See lots of space left for your spaghetti. My famous spaghetti it is then. Daniel set her down and ruffled her hair. Why don't you wash your hands while I say goodbye to Mrs. Patterson? As Emma skipped toward the bathroom, chattering to herself about knights and dragons, Daniel walked Mrs. Patterson to her car. The wind was picking up, sending fallen leaves skittering across the driveway in miniature tornadoes. She's been good as gold, the older woman said, pulling her sweater tighter. Though she did ask me 3 times when you'd be home. That little girl worries about her daddy. She's been through enough upheaval, Daniel replied quietly. I try to keep things predictable for her. Mrs. Patterson's weathered hand touched his arm gently. You're a good father, Daniel. Sarah would be proud of the man you've become. The unexpected mention of his late wife hit him like a sucker punch. 2 years had passed since the car accident that took Sarah from them, but grief still ambushed him at the most unexpected moments in the grocery store, when he spotted her favorite cereal at Emma's school plays, when he saw couples sharing the moment he experienced alone. Thank you, he managed. Drive safely. This storm looks like it's going to be a big one. Inside, Emma was already setting the table with the mismatched plates and cups they'd accumulated over the years. She hummed while she worked the same off-key melody Sarah used to hum while cooking. The resemblance between mother and daughter was striking: the same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same way of tilting her head when concentrating. Daddy, Emma said, as he started browning ground beef for the sauce. Why do some people think dragons are scary? Daniel considered the question while adding onions to the pan. Emma's questions often contained layers he was still learning to navigate, simple on the surface, but touching on deeper fears and uncertainties. Well, he said carefully, I think sometimes people are afraid of things they don't understand. Dragons in stories are usually big and powerful and different from what people are used to. But that doesn't make them bad, right? Not necessarily. Sometimes the scariest-looking creatures turn out to have the biggest hearts. Emma nodded sagely, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Like in the story Mrs. Patterson read today, the dragon just wanted friends, but everyone ran away because of how he looked. Thunder rumbled closer now, rattling the kitchen windows. Daniel glanced outside and saw the storm clouds massing like an advancing army, dark and heavy with the promise of violence. The Weather Service had issued warnings all afternoon: severe thunderstorms, possible tornadoes, flash flooding. Emma, sweetheart, I think we should eat in the living room tonight. We can build a blanket fort and pretend we're camping. Her face lit up. Really? Can we tell stories too? Absolutely. But first help me gather some supplies. If the power goes out, I want us to be ready. They spent the next hour preparing for the storm, filling containers with water, checking the flashlights, gathering candles and matches. Emma treated it like an adventure, chattering excitedly about camping indoors, while Daniel tried to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in his stomach. The power died just as they finished their makeshift dinner. One moment the house hummed with electricity, the next they were plunged into darkness, broken only by the candles Daniel had strategically placed around the living room. Emma squealed with delight rather than fear. It's like a real castle, she exclaimed, crawling into the blanket fort Daniel had constructed, using couch cushions and dining room chairs. Tell me a story, Daddy. Tell me about the brave knight and the Ice Queen. Daniel settled beside her, pulling a throw blanket around their shoulders. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, wind howling like a living thing, rain drumming against the windows with machine gun intensity. But inside their little fortress, surrounded by flickering candlelight and his daughter's infectious enthusiasm, he felt a measure of peace. Once upon a time, he began, there was a kingdom where winter had lasted far too long. The crops wouldn't grow, the rivers had frozen solid, and the people were losing hope. They blamed the Ice Queen who ruled from her crystal palace, saying she had cursed the land with her cold heart. Was she really bad? Emma asked, snuggling closer. That's what everyone believed. But there was one brave knight who wondered if maybe, just maybe, the queen wasn't evil at all. Maybe she was just lonely. Her thunder crashed overhead with such violence that the house seemed to shake. Emma pressed against his side, no longer quite as excited about their indoor camping adventure. It's okay, sweetheart, Daniel murmured, tightening his arms around her. It's just noise. We're safe in here. What happened to the knight? Emma asked in a small voice. Did he save the Ice Queen? Daniel was about to continue the story when a sound cut through the storm, distinct from the thunder and rain. Someone was pounding on his front door. He froze, listening intently. The knocking came again, urgent and desperate. Daniel's mind raced through possibilities. Mrs. Patterson, no. She'd made it home safely before the worst of the storm hit. A neighbor in trouble. The nearest house was a quarter-mile away, and he couldn't imagine anyone venturing out in this weather unless it was a true emergency. Stay right here, Emma, he said, extracting himself from their blanket fort. I'm going to see who that is. Daddy, don't leave. Emma's voice carried a tremor of genuine fear now. I'll be right back, I promise. Just stay in the fort where it's safe. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and made his way through the darkened house to the front door. The pounding continued, growing more frantic. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, he could make out two shapes, one tall, one much smaller. He flicked on the porch light, grateful that his backup generator was still running, and peered through the peephole. What he saw made his blood run cold. Victoria Cross stood on his doorstep, completely soaked, her usually perfect hair plastered to her skull. She was clutching a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, who was shivering violently in her arms. Both of them looked like they'd been caught in the full fury of the storm. Daniel's hand hovered over the deadbolt. This was the woman who had humiliated him just hours ago, who had essentially fired him with corporate doublespeak and condescension. The woman who had dismissed his life's work as outdated thinking and made him feel like a fool in front of his colleagues. The irony was so bitter he could taste it. The Ice Queen standing on his doorstep like a beggar needing his help. The boy in her arms let out a small cry that pierced through Daniel's anger like an arrow through armor. Whatever Victoria had done to him, this child was innocent. And Daniel Hayes, despite his wounds and pride, was not the kind of man who could turn away from a scared child on a night like this. He turned the deadbolt and opened the door. The wind nearly ripped it from his hands, sending rain slashing into the entryway. Victoria stumbled forward, almost falling, as she tried to shelter the boy from the storm. "I'm sorry," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "My car. It died on the road, about a mile from here. The water was rising, and I didn't know where else." She looked up at him then, and Daniel saw something in her eyes he'd never expected to see from the Ice Queen vulnerability. Raw, desperate vulnerability. "Come in," he said, stepping aside, "before you both freeze to death." Victoria staggered through the doorway, still carrying the boy. Daniel slammed the door against the storm and turned to face his unexpected guests. In the warm glow of the hallway light, they looked even worse than he'd first thought. Victoria's expensive business suit was ruined, clinging to her like a second skin. Mascara had run in dark tracks down her cheeks, and her lips were tinged blue with cold. The boy her son Daniel realized was wearing a soccer uniform that offered no protection against the elements. "Thank you," Victoria whispered, setting the boy down on unsteady legs. "I know after today, you have every right to slam that door in my face." Daniel looked down at the child, who was staring up at him with wide, frightened eyes. The boy had Victoria's dark hair, but softer features, and something about his expression reminded Daniel achingly of Emma after Sarah's funeral lost, and trying so hard to be brave. "What's your name, buddy?" Daniel asked gently, crouching down to the boy's level. "Tyler," the child whispered, his teeth chattering. "Tyler Cross. Are you going to help us?" The simple question asked with such heartbreaking hope shattered the last of Daniel's resistance. He glanced up at Victoria, who was watching the exchange with something that might have been surprise. "Of course I'm going to help you," Daniel said firmly. "Let's get you both warmed up." He led them through the darkened house toward the living room where candlelight flickered invitingly, and the sound of Emma's humming drifted from the blanket fort. "Daddy?" Emma's voice called out uncertainly. "Who was at the door?" "We have some visitors, sweetheart," Daniel replied. "They got caught in the storm." Emma poked her head out of the fort, her eyes growing wide as she took in the bedraggled figures following her father. If she recognized Victoria from the drawing she'd made after visiting Daniel's office, the one where she'd labeled the stern-looking woman Ice Queen, based on office gossip she'd overheard, she gave no sign. "Hi," Emma said shyly, focusing on Tyler. "I'm Emma. Are you okay?" Tyler nodded mutely, still shivering despite being out of the storm. Emma, with the uncomplicated compassion of childhood, crawled out of the fort and approached the soaked boy. "You're really wet," she observed matter-of-factly. "My daddy has extra clothes, and we have hot chocolate." "Emma's right," Daniel said, already moving toward the linen closet. "Let me get you both some dry clothes and blankets. Tyler, you look about Emma's size. We might have something that fits." As he gathered towels and searched through Emma's outgrown clothes for something that might work for Tyler, Daniel's mind raced. How had Victoria's car ended up stranded near his house? The main road was miles away, and his street was a dead end that led nowhere. She would have had to deliberately turn down his road, but why? He returned to the living room with an armload of supplies to find Emma showing Tyler her collection of books, while Victoria stood awkwardly by the fireplace, dripping onto the hardwood floor. In the candlelight, stripped of her corporate armor and usual commanding presence, she looked smaller somehow, more human. "Here," Daniel said, handing Victoria a stack of towels and his largest sweater. "The bathroom is down the hall, second door on the right. Tyler, Emma can show you where you can change into these dry clothes." "I can take the couch if you have extra blankets," Victoria said quietly. "I don't want to impose more than necessary." "Mom," Tyler spoke up for the first time since introducing himself. "I'm scared. The thunder is really loud." Something passed across Victoria's face, a flicker of pain so quick Daniel almost missed it. She knelt beside her son, her wet hair falling forward as she touched his cheek gently. "I know, sweetheart. But we're safe now. This nice man is going to let us stay until the storm passes." "Can I stay with Emma?" Tyler asked, looking hopefully at the little girl who was already treating him like a long-lost friend. "If that's okay with Emma and her daddy," Victoria replied, glancing at Daniel uncertainly. "Of course," Emma piped up. "We can share the fort. It's really cozy, and there's room for 2, maybe even 3 if we squeeze." As the children chattered excitedly about their impromptu sleepover, Daniel caught Victoria's eye. The gratitude in her expression was unmistakable, but there was something else too, a wariness that suggested she wasn't used to accepting help from anyone. "Go get changed," he said gently. "We'll figure out sleeping arrangements after you're both warm and dry." Victoria nodded and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Daniel alone with the two children. Emma was already showing Tyler her favorite picture book, explaining the story with animated gestures, while Tyler listened with rapt attention. The easy way they'd connected reminded Daniel that children had a gift for seeing past the complications that tangled adult lives. When Victoria returned 20 minutes later, she was transformed. Daniel's oversized sweater hung loose on her frame, and she'd borrowed a pair of Emma's cartoon print pajama pants that were hilariously too short, but at least dry. Her hair was towel-dried and fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and without makeup she looked younger, less like the intimidating CEO and more like a tired single mother. "Thank you," she said, settling carefully on the edge of the couch. "For the clothes, for letting us in, for everything. I know I don't deserve your kindness after today." Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching Tyler and Emma giggle over something in one of the books. "You have a son," he said finally. "I didn't know. I don't advertise my personal life at work." Victoria's voice carried a defensive edge, but it softened as she watched Tyler. "It's just the two of us. His father—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "That's not important right now." Another crash of thunder shook the house, and Tyler instinctively moved closer to Emma, who patted his arm reassuringly. "My daddy says thunder is just the sky being grumpy," Emma announced with 6-year-old authority. "It sounds scary, but it can't hurt us when we're inside." "That's right," Daniel agreed, settling into his armchair with a steaming mug of coffee he'd managed to prepare on his gas stove. "Sometimes loud noises are just that noise, nothing more." He offered Victoria a mug, which she accepted gratefully, wrapping her hands around it like it was a lifeline. "How did you end up on my street?" Daniel asked quietly, keeping his voice low so the children wouldn't overhear. "The main road is miles from here." Victoria's cheeks flushed, whether from the warm drink or embarrassment Daniel couldn't tell. "I was driving around," she admitted. "After what happened in the office, I couldn't concentrate on work. I kept thinking about what you said about principles and, I don't know, I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. You were driving around in a storm. It wasn't this bad when I left the office." Victoria's grip tightened on her mug. Tyler had a soccer game that got canceled, and he was disappointed. "I thought a drive might help both of us clear our heads. Then the rain started getting worse and my car started making strange noises. When it finally died, yours was the only house with lights on." Daniel nodded, though something about her explanation felt incomplete. People didn't usually drive 20 miles into unfamiliar neighborhoods just to clear their heads, especially not with their children in the car. But he didn't press the issue. "Well," he said instead, "you're both safe now. That's what matters." A comfortable silence fell over the room, broken only by the children's quiet chatter and the storm's continued assault on the house. Daniel found himself studying Victoria in the flickering candlelight, trying to reconcile this vulnerable woman with the ice-cold executive who had torn him apart just hours earlier. "Daddy," Emma called from the fort. "Tyler wants to hear the story about the knight and the Ice Queen. Can you tell it again?" Daniel felt heat creep up his neck as he glanced at Victoria, who raised an eyebrow with the first hint of amusement he'd seen from her all evening. "Ice Queen," she murmured. "How apropos." "It's just a fairy tale," Daniel said quickly. "Emma likes stories about brave knights and magical kingdoms." "I heard," Victoria replied, and there was something in her tone that Daniel couldn't quite decipher. "Please don't let me stop you. I'd be curious to hear how this particular story ends." Daniel looked at his daughter's expectant face, then at Tyler, who was watching him with the same hopeful expression. There was no graceful way out of this situation. Once upon a time, he began reluctantly, there was a knight who discovered that the Ice Queen everyone feared wasn't evil at all. She was just protecting herself the only way she knew how. But why did she need protecting? Emma asked, settling deeper into the fort, with Tyler beside her. Daniel's eyes met Victoria's across the room. She was watching him intently, as if the answer to his daughter's innocent question carried weight beyond fairy tale logic. Because, Daniel said slowly, sometimes when people get hurt badly enough, they build walls around their hearts. Ice walls that keep the cold in and everyone else out. The Queen thought that if she never let anyone close, she could never be hurt again. That sounds lonely, Tyler said quietly. It was very lonely, Daniel agreed. But the Queen had convinced herself that being alone was better than being hurt. What did the knight do? Emma pressed. Daniel hesitated, acutely aware that Victoria was hanging on every word. The knight realized that the Queen didn't need to be defeated. She needed to be understood. So instead of trying to break down her walls with force, he offered her something she'd almost forgotten existed. What, both children asked in unison. Kindness, Daniel said simply, without expecting anything in return. The room fell silent except for the storm outside. Victoria's eyes never left Daniel's face, and he saw something shifting in her expression, a crack in the ice perhaps, or the first tentative recognition of warmth. Did it work? Tyler asked. Did the Queen remember how to be warm? Daniel looked at Victoria, then at her son, then at his own daughter, who was waiting for him to finish the story. But the truth was, he didn't know how this particular fairy tale ended. It was still being written one unexpected moment at a time. I think, he said carefully, that's a story we'll have to finish another time. Thunder rolled overhead once more, but somehow it sounded less threatening, more like a distant drum roll announcing the beginning of something new rather than the end of something old. In the warm glow of candlelight, surrounded by the innocent trust of children and the fragile possibility of understanding, Daniel Hayes began to wonder if sometimes the most powerful storms weren't the ones that destroyed, but the ones that cleared the way for unexpected grace. Outside, the tempest raged on, but inside, in the space between silence and story, between pride and forgiveness, something was shifting. Something that neither the knight nor the Queen had planned for, but both were beginning to recognize as the rarest of gifts, a second chance. The wind had finally begun to settle into a steady rhythm against the windows, no longer the violent assault that had driven Victoria and Tyler to Daniel's door. Emma had fallen asleep, first curled up in the blanket fort, with one arm thrown protectively over Tyler, who followed her into slumber moments later. Their soft breathing created a peaceful counterpoint to the storm's diminishing fury. Daniel watched them sleep, these two children, who had found comfort in each other so easily, while their parents sat in careful silence across the room. Victoria had pulled her knees up to her chest on the couch, Daniel's oversized sweater making her look smaller and more vulnerable than he'd ever imagined possible. She stared into the flickering candle flames with an expression he couldn't quite read. They look peaceful, Victoria said softly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly an hour. Children have a gift for finding joy even in difficult circumstances, Daniel replied, keeping his voice low. Emma's been through more upheaval than any 6-year-old should have to endure, but she still believes in happy endings. Victoria's gaze shifted to him. Her mother, car accident 2 years ago. The words still felt like swallowing glass even after all this time. Drunk driver ran a red light. Emma was in the car but walked away without a scratch. Sometimes I think that makes it harder for her. Survivor's guilt is complicated enough for adults to process. I'm sorry, Victoria said, and something in her tone suggested she understood loss in ways that went beyond polite sympathy. That must have been devastating. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. He rarely talked about Sarah with anyone outside his immediate circle, but something about the storm-induced intimacy of the moment loosened his usual guardedness. Sarah was the strongest person I knew. She would have handled single parenthood with grace and wisdom. I'm still figuring it out day by day. You're doing better than you think, Victoria said, watching Emma's peaceful face. She's clearly loved and secure. That doesn't happen by accident. The unexpected compliment caught Daniel off guard. He studied Victoria's profile in the candlelight, noting the way the harsh lines that usually defined her features had softened. Without the armor of her business attire and commanding presence, she looked almost ethereal, like someone who might indeed rule from a crystal palace, isolated and untouchable. "What about Tyler's father?" Daniel asked gently, then immediately regretted the question when Victoria's expression shuttered closed. "I'm sorry. That's none of my business." "No, it's—" Victoria sighed, running her fingers through her still damp hair. "It's complicated. Richard and I divorced when Tyler was 3. He's a brilliant surgeon who decided that being a father interfered with his career trajectory. He sends checks for child support, but hasn't seen Tyler in over a year." The pain in her voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Daniel felt an unexpected surge of anger toward a man he'd never met. What kind of father could walk away from a child like Tyler? "That's his loss," Daniel said firmly. "Tyler seems like an amazing kid." "He is," Victoria agreed, and for the first time since she'd arrived, her voice carried genuine warmth. "He's smart and kind and endlessly curious about everything. Sometimes I look at him and wonder how I got so lucky, and then I remember that I'm probably failing him in a dozen ways I don't even recognize." "Welcome to parenthood," Daniel said with a rueful smile. "The constant fear that you're permanently damaging them despite your best intentions." Victoria laughed softly, a sound Daniel had never heard from her before. It transformed her face, completely erasing years of carefully maintained professional distance. "Is that what this is? Because some days I feel like I'm drowning, and other days I'm convinced I'm the worst mother in history. You drove through a storm because Tyler was disappointed about his soccer game," Daniel pointed out. "That doesn't sound like a bad mother to me." "That's not exactly—" Victoria started, then stopped, her cheeks flushing again. "Actually, that's not entirely true." Daniel waited, sensing there was more to the story of how she'd ended up on his doorstep. "I wasn't just driving around aimlessly," Victoria admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "After I left the office, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened in the boardroom. About what you said regarding principles and long-term vision. So I went home and did something I rarely do. I actually read your entire proposal instead of just skimming the executive summary." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. And I realized I made a mistake," Victoria said, meeting his eyes directly. "Your solar integration model isn't outdated at all. It's actually ahead of the curve in ways I didn't initially recognize. The efficiency algorithms you developed could revolutionize how we approach renewable energy storage and distribution." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Daniel felt a complex mix of vindication and confusion. If Victoria had recognized the value of his work, had she humiliated him so publicly, then why things? He began. "Because I'm an idiot," Victoria said bluntly. Because I walked into that boardroom with my mind already made up about what needed to change, and I didn't give your presentation the attention it deserved. Because I've spent so many years building walls around myself that sometimes I attack before I think." The honesty in her voice was raw and unexpected. Daniel found himself leaning forward, drawn by this glimpse of the woman beneath the Ice Queen facade. "After I finished reading your proposal, I got in the car with Tyler and just started driving," Victoria continued. "I needed to think to figure out how to fix what I'd done without losing face completely. Tyler fell asleep in the passenger seat, and I kept driving until I realized I was on your street. I thought maybe I could find your house, figure out what to say, practice an apology that didn't sound completely inadequate." "You came here to apologize?" Daniel asked, incredulous. "I came here to try," Victoria corrected. "Then the storm hit, and my car died, and suddenly I was standing on your porch, looking like a drowned rat, asking for help from the man I'd just professionally humiliated. The irony wasn't lost on me." Thunder rumbled overhead again, but it sounded distant now, as if the storm was finally moving on toward other destinations. In the fort, Tyler stirred slightly, murmuring something in his sleep before settling back into peaceful slumber. "You know," Daniel said slowly, "when I opened that door and saw you standing there, my first instinct was to slam it shut and pretend I'd never seen you." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "I wouldn't have blamed you. I deserved that and worse. But then I saw Tyler," Daniel continued, "and I realized that whatever was between us shouldn't affect an innocent child who was scared and cold." "You're a better person than I am," Victoria said quietly. "If our positions were reversed, I'm not sure I would have been so generous." "You might surprise yourself," Daniel replied. "People can be capable of more grace than they think when it really matters." They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence, now less careful, more companionable. The candlelight flickered across their faces, creating an intimacy that felt both unexpected and somehow inevitable. "Tell me about her," Victoria said suddenly. "Your wife, what was she like?" Daniel's initial instinct was to deflect. He rarely discussed Sarah in detail with anyone, even close friends. But something about Victoria's quiet vulnerability, about the way she'd opened herself to judgment by admitting her mistakes, made him want to share. "Sarah was a teacher." He began, his voice soft with memory. "Second grade. She had this incredible ability to see potential in every child who walked into her classroom, even the ones other teachers had given up on. She used to say that every kid just needed someone to believe in them completely." "She sounds wonderful," Victoria said, and there was no trace of polite social convention in her voice, just genuine interest. "She was stubborn as hell," Daniel continued, surprising himself with a smile. "Once she made up her mind about something, there was no changing it. She decided she was going to marry me on our second date, and I didn't stand a chance." "How did you meet?" "Community center fundraiser. I was there representing my company, wearing a suit I couldn't afford, and trying to network with people way above my pay grade. Sarah was running the children's activity table, covered in finger paint and glue, telling stories to a group of kids who were hanging on her every word." Daniel's voice grew warm with the memory. "She looked up and caught me staring, and instead of being embarrassed, she walked right over and asked if I wanted to help with arts and crafts. I spent the entire evening making construction paper flowers with 6-year-olds and listening to Sarah explain why every child's artwork was absolutely perfect." "That's beautiful," Victoria said softly. "She would have liked you, I think," Daniel said, then immediately wondered why he'd shared that thought. Victoria looked startled. "I doubt that. I'm not exactly known for my warmth with children." "But you are warm with Tyler," Daniel observed. I've watched you with him tonight. You might hide it well, but there's nothing cold about the way you love your son. Victoria's eyes filled with unexpected tears. I try so hard to give him everything he needs, but I'm afraid I'm failing him. I work too much. I'm not patient enough. I don't know how to do the fun parent things that come naturally to other mothers. You brought him to my house because he was disappointed about a canceled soccer game, Daniel reminded her gently. You drove through a storm because you thought it might help him feel better. That's not failing, that's love. But look at him. Victoria gestured toward the sleeping children. He's more relaxed and happy with Emma and you in one evening than he's been at home in weeks. Maybe he'd be better off with his father or with foster parents who actually know what they're doing. The pain in her voice was so acute that Daniel found himself moving to the couch before he'd consciously decided to do so. He sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance, but close enough that she could feel his presence. Victoria, he said firmly. Every parent feels that way sometimes. The fact that you worry about whether you're good enough proves that you care deeply about Tyler's well-being. Bad parents don't lie awake at night wondering if they're screwing up their kids. How do you know I lie awake at night? Victoria asked with a watery smile. Because I do too, Daniel admitted. Every night. I wonder if Emma needs a mother figure, if I'm too protective or not protective enough, if I'm teaching her the right values or inadvertently passing on my own neuroses. Parenting is terrifying for everyone who takes it seriously. Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You make it look so effortless, though. The way you talk to Emma, the way you handled Tyler's fear during the storm, you have natural instincts I feel like I'm completely lacking. Practice, Daniel said simply, and desperation. When Sarah died, I had to figure out how to be both parents to Emma. I made 1,000 mistakes in those first few months. I still make mistakes every day. Like what? Daniel considered the question seriously. Last week I let Emma eat ice cream for breakfast because she was crying about missing her mother, and I couldn't think of anything else to do. Last month I completely forgot about show and tell until Emma reminded me 5 minutes before school, so I wrapped up a stapler and told her to say it was her father's favorite office supply. Victoria laughed, a real laugh this time, full of genuine amusement. Did it work? She got an A+ and became the envy of every kid in her class. Apparently staplers are the height of sophistication in 2nd grade. I would never have thought of that, Victoria said, shaking her head. When Tyler has a problem, I try to solve it with logic and planning. It never occurs to me to just be creative and roll with it. Different approaches, Daniel said. Tyler probably benefits from having a mother who thinks strategically. Emma needs more structure than I sometimes provide. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their children sleep. The storm outside had settled into a gentle patter of rain against the windows, and the candles had burned down enough that the light was softer, more intimate. Can I ask you something? Victoria said eventually. Of course. In the office today, when you defended your proposal, you weren't really defending the project, were you? You were defending something bigger. Daniel considered her words carefully. What do you mean? The way you talked about sustainable growth and long-term vision, Victoria explained. It felt personal, like you were fighting for a principle that went beyond quarterly profits. I suppose I was, Daniel admitted. After Sarah died, I had to think seriously about what kind of legacy I wanted to leave for Emma, what kind of world I wanted her to inherit. It's easy to make decisions based on short-term gains when you don't have to look a 6-year-old in the eye and explain why adults chose profit over principle. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I've never thought about business in those terms, she said finally. Legacy, I mean. I've always focused on the immediate challenges, the next quarter, the next acquisition, the next crisis to manage. It's hard to think long-term when you're in survival mode, Daniel observed. And from what I've heard, Innovatech was definitely in crisis when you arrived. Bleeding money and hemorrhaging talent, Victoria confirmed. The board brought me in specifically because I have a reputation for making hard decisions quickly. I've turned around 3 companies in the past 5 years by cutting costs and streamlining operations. That takes courage, Daniel acknowledged. But it also takes a toll, doesn't it? Being the person who always has to make the difficult choices. Victoria's smile was rueful. You have no idea. Do you know why they call me the Ice Queen? I assumed it was because of your leadership style, Daniel said diplomatically. Partially, Victoria agreed. But it's also because I've learned to turn off my emotions when I'm making business decisions. It's easier to fire 50 people if you don't think about their families, their mortgages, their children's college funds. It's easier to shut down a division if you don't consider the dreams and careers you're destroying. But you do think about those things, Daniel said with certainty. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here questioning your decisions. I try not to, Victoria said quietly. But lately, especially since Tyler started asking more questions about my work, I've been wondering if I've become someone I don't recognize, someone my son might not be proud to call his mother. The vulnerability in her admission was breathtaking. Daniel found himself studying her face in the candlelight, seeing past the polished exterior to the woman beneath a mother who worked too hard and worried too much, who carried the weight of impossible decisions and tried to shield her son from the cost of her choices. Tyler adores you, Daniel said firmly. I've watched him tonight, and there's no question about how much he loves and trusts you. Whatever else you might doubt about yourself, don't doubt that. Even when I work 16-hour days and miss his school plays because of board meetings. Even then, Daniel confirmed. Children are remarkably resilient and forgiving, especially when they know they're loved unconditionally. Victoria's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. I don't know how to be softer, she whispered. I've spent so many years building armor around myself that I'm not sure there's anything underneath anymore. There is, Daniel said with quiet conviction. I've seen glimpses of it tonight. The way you held Tyler during the storm, the way you admitted your mistakes about my proposal, the way you're sitting here questioning whether you're good enough for your son. That's not armor talking, that's your heart. Victoria looked at him then with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and disbelief. How do you do that? Do what? See good in people who don't deserve it. Offer kindness to someone who treated you terribly. I humiliated you in front of your colleagues, essentially fired you, and you still opened your door when I needed help. Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. I suppose it's because I've learned that holding on to anger only hurts the person carrying it, and because everyone deserves the chance to be more than their worst moment. Even ice queens, Victoria asked with a tentative smile. Especially ice queens, Daniel replied. After all, ice is just water that's been through difficult circumstances. It can always melt again under the right conditions. Victoria's laugh was soft and surprised. Did you just quote my own fairy tale back to me? Sometimes the best wisdom comes wrapped in stories children can understand, Daniel said. Emma's taught me that the most profound truths are often the simplest ones. They fell into silence again, but the quality of quiet between them had shifted once more. There was an awareness now, a recognition of something unnamed but undeniable building in the space between them. Victoria tucked her feet under herself and turned slightly on the couch, facing Daniel more directly. "What happens now?" she asked. "With your job, I mean. I can't exactly undo what happened in the boardroom today." "I'm not sure," Daniel admitted. "I suppose I'll update my resume and start looking for something new. It might actually be a blessing in disguise. Emma and I could use a fresh start." "Or," Victoria said carefully, "you could give me a chance to make this right." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean that your proposal deserves a fair hearing from people who understand its potential. I mean that Innovatech needs someone with your vision and integrity, even if I was too proud and stubborn to recognize it initially." "Victoria, I'm serious," she interrupted, leaning forward with sudden intensity. "What if we could restructure the renewable energy division around your solar integration model? What if, instead of being just another engineer on the team, you led the entire project from conception to implementation?" Daniel felt his pulse quicken despite himself. The possibility she was describing was everything he'd dreamed of professionally, the chance to see his vision become reality, to make a meaningful impact on sustainable energy development. "That's a generous offer," he said slowly, "but I'm not sure it would work. After what happened today, how could I possibly have credibility with the team?" "Because I would make it clear that I was wrong," Victoria said firmly, "publicly and unequivocally, because I would give you the authority and resources to prove that your approach can work." "And if it fails?" Victoria's smile was wry. "Then we'll fail together. But I don't think it will fail, Daniel. I think it might be exactly what Innovatech needs to become the company it should be, instead of just the company it's always been." The offer hung between them, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Daniel thought about Emma, about the stability they'd found in their quiet life, about the risk of tying their future to a woman who'd already shown she could be ruthless when circumstances demanded it. But he also thought about the possibility of meaningful work, of building something that could make a real difference in the world. He thought about Tyler's innocent question, "Are you going to help us?" and wondered if helping Victoria find her way back to warmth might be part of his own journey toward healing. "I'll need guarantees," he said finally. "About authority, about budget, about the freedom to implement my vision without interference." "Whatever you need," Victoria agreed immediately. "And I'll need your word that Tyler and Emma's friendship won't be affected if things don't work out between us professionally." Victoria's expression softened. "You have it. They've found something special tonight, haven't they?" Daniel glanced toward the fort, where the two children slept peacefully, Emma's arm still draped protectively over Tyler. "They have. I'd hate for adult complications to interfere with that." "So would I," Victoria agreed. "Tyler hasn't connected with another child this easily since the divorce. Whatever else happens, I want him to keep this friendship." The rain had almost stopped, now reduced to occasional drops against the windows. Dawn was still hours away, but Daniel could sense the storm's grip on the night beginning to loosen. Soon, Victoria and Tyler would need to make arrangements for getting home, and this strange interlude of intimacy and revelation would end. "There's something else," Victoria said quietly, interrupting his thoughts. "What's that?" "I need you to know that offering you this position isn't guilt or charity. It's not me trying to buy forgiveness for my behavior today." Daniel met her eyes directly. "Then what is it?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "It's me recognizing that I need someone like you in my life. Professionally, yes, but also personally. Someone who sees potential for warmth, even in ice queens. Someone who believes in principles and long-term vision and the possibility that people can change." The admission was so honest, so quietly vulnerable, that Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of defenses he'd maintained since Sarah's death, a recognition that healing sometimes came from the most unexpected sources. "Victoria," he said softly. "I know it's complicated," she continued quickly. "I know I have no right to ask for anything beyond professional redemption. But Tyler was happier tonight than I've seen him in months, and I felt more like myself than I have in years. If there's any possibility that this could work—" "It could work," Daniel interrupted gently. "It's terrifying, and probably inadvisable, and definitely complicated, but it could work." Victoria's smile was radiant, transforming her face completely. In that moment, Daniel could see exactly what she might have looked like before life taught her to build walls around her heart, young and hopeful and absolutely luminous. "Really?" she asked, and there was something almost childlike in her wonder. "Really," Daniel confirmed. "Though we should probably take things slowly. Figure out the professional relationship first, then see what develops naturally." "Slowly," Victoria agreed, though her eyes were sparkling with something that looked very much like anticipation. "I can do slowly." From the fort came a small sound, Tyler stirring in his sleep, reaching out instinctively for comfort. Emma, still fast asleep, seemed to sense his movement, and shifted closer, her protective embrace tightening slightly. Both children settled back into peaceful slumber, their unconscious trust in each other, a testament to the connections that could form when hearts remained open. Daniel watched them sleep and thought about storms and fairy tales, about ice queens and brave knights, about the unexpected grace that could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. Outside, the first pale hints of dawn were beginning to touch the horizon, promising clear skies and new beginnings. The morning light filtering through the windows found them both asleep on opposite ends of the couch, Victoria curled beneath one of Daniel's spare blankets, while he dozed in his armchair, with his head tilted back, at what would surely prove to be an uncomfortable angle. The candles had burned down to waxy pools during the night, and the house held the peaceful quiet that followed storms, a stillness that spoke of survival and unexpected shelter. Emma woke first, as she always did, emerging from the blanket fort like a small, disheveled explorer. She paused when she saw the sleeping adults, her 6-year-old mind processing the unusual scene with the adaptability that children possessed in abundance. Tyler stirred at her movement, blinking confused eyes as he remembered where he was. "Is it morning?" he whispered, his voice still thick with sleep. "Uh-huh," Emma whispered back, crawling out of the fort completely. "The storm stopped. Want to see outside?" They tiptoed to the living room window, careful not to wake the grown-ups, and peered out at a world transformed. The violence of the previous night had given way to crystalline clarity, puddles reflecting the pale sky like scattered mirrors, tree branches heavy with droplets that caught the early light like tiny prisms. The air looked washed clean, as if the storm had scrubbed away not just the dust and debris, but some invisible weight that had been pressing down on everything. "It's pretty." Tyler observed his breath fogging the glass slightly. "Daddy says storms make everything new," Emma replied with the authority of someone passing along received wisdom. "Like the world gets a bath." Their quiet conversation gradually penetrated Daniel's consciousness, drawing him from the uncomfortable doze he'd fallen into sometime before dawn. His neck ached terribly, and his back protested the night spent in the armchair. But when he opened his eyes and saw the two children standing together at the window, their silhouettes backlit by the morning sun, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with physical comfort. Victoria woke more slowly, consciousness returning in gradual waves as she became aware of unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. Where was Tyler? What had happened? Then memory flooded back the storm, the car breaking down Daniel's unexpected kindness, the long conversation that had stretched deep into the night. She sat up carefully, running her fingers through her tangled hair, acutely aware that she probably looked like she'd been through a natural disaster. "Good morning," Daniel said softly, his voice rough with sleep, but carrying genuine warmth. "Good morning," Victoria replied, then glanced toward the window where their children stood. "Did we really sleep on your couch all night?" "Looks like it," Daniel said, stretching with a grimace. "Though I think my chiropractor is going to have some strong words about my choice of sleeping arrangements." Tyler turned from the window and ran to his mother, climbing onto the couch beside her with the easy affection that made Victoria's heart squeeze tight. "Mommy, look how pretty it is outside. Emma says storms make everything clean." "Emma's very wise," Victoria said, smoothing Tyler's sleep-rumpled hair. Her eyes met Daniel's over their children's heads, and she felt that same flutter of connection that had surprised her the night before. In the morning light, with her defenses down, and her usual armor nowhere to be found, she felt exposed in ways that were both terrifying and oddly liberating. "Are you hungry?" Emma asked Tyler with the directness that children employed when getting to the important matters. "Daddy makes really good pancakes, like the best pancakes in the whole world." "I don't know about the whole world," Daniel protested with a smile, "but they're definitely edible." "Can we, Mom?" Tyler asked, bouncing slightly on the couch cushions. "Can we have pancakes with Emma and Mr. Hayes?" Victoria hesitated, suddenly aware of how this might look, the CEO of Innovatech having breakfast with an employee she'd essentially fired the day before, the both of them, wearing borrowed clothes and looking like they'd weathered more than just a storm. But then she looked at Tyler's hopeful face, at Emma's enthusiastic nodding, and realized that what other people might think mattered far less than the happiness of these two children who had found such easy friendship. "If Mr. Hayes doesn't mind cooking for additional guests," she said carefully. "It would be my pleasure," Daniel replied, and Victoria could tell he meant it. Besides, pancakes are definitely better with an audience. The kitchen filled with a different kind of warmth as Daniel moved efficiently around the space, Emma chattering constantly, while she helped by setting the table with mismatched plates and cups. Tyler watched everything with wide-eyed fascination, clearly unaccustomed to the casual chaos of a kitchen where cooking was an adventure rather than a chore to be completed as quickly as possible. Victoria found herself studying Daniel as he worked, noting the way he included both children in the process, without making them feel like they were in the way. Emma measured flour with intense concentration, while Tyler was given the important job of counting out the correct number of chocolate chips. There was something deeply appealing about watching him move through his domestic routine, a man comfortable in his own space, confident in his ability to create something nurturing and good. "Mom never lets me help cook," Tyler confided to Emma in a stage whisper that carried clearly across the kitchen. Victoria felt heat creep up her neck. It was true she rarely cooked anything more complicated than microwave dinners or takeout, and when she did attempt to prepare actual meals, she approached the task with the same efficiency-focused mindset she brought to everything else. The idea of letting Tyler assist with all the spills and messes that would inevitably result had always seemed counterproductive. "Maybe your mom just hasn't had the right teacher," Daniel said diplomatically, catching Victoria's embarrassed expression. "Cooking is more fun when you have helpers, but it definitely takes longer." "I have time," Victoria said quietly, surprising herself with the admission. It wasn't entirely true, her schedule was as packed as ever, but something about the warm domestic scene unfolding around her made her want to create space for these kinds of moments. "Really?" Tyler asked, his face lighting up with excitement. "You'd let me help cook dinner sometimes." "I think we could arrange that," Victoria agreed, then looked at Daniel. Though I might need some guidance. My culinary skills are somewhat limited. Everyone starts somewhere, Daniel said, flipping a perfect golden pancake with practiced ease. Emma and I learned together after we had to figure out a lot of things together. The reference to his wife's death was gentle but present, acknowledging the loss without dwelling on it. Victoria found herself wondering about the early days of Daniel's single parenthood, the overwhelming responsibility of suddenly being everything to a grieving child while managing his own grief. Were you scared? Tyler asked with the innocent directness that children wielded like a superpower. When you had to take care of Emma all by yourself? Daniel paused in his pancake flipping, considering the question seriously. Very scared, he admitted. I didn't know if I was strong enough or smart enough to be everything Emma needed. But you were, Emma chimed in loyally. You're the best daddy ever. I don't know about that, Daniel said, ruffling her hair. But I try my best every day, and that seems to be enough. Victoria felt something twist in her chest at the simple honesty of his words. She thought about her own fears, her constant worry that she was failing Tyler in ways she couldn't even identify. There was something both humbling and encouraging about Daniel's admission that he'd been scared too, that competent parenting wasn't about the absence of fear, but about continuing to show up despite it. What about you, Ms. Cross? Emma asked with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Do you get scared sometimes? The question caught Victoria off guard. In her professional life, admitting fear was tantamount to showing weakness, something that could be exploited by competitors or undermine her authority with subordinates. But here in this sun-filled kitchen with syrup warming on the stove and children's laughter echoing off the walls, the truth seemed safer somehow. All the time, she said honestly, especially when it comes to taking care of Tyler. I want to be the best mom I can be, but sometimes I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Tyler slipped off his chair and came around the table to hug her, his small arms wrapping around her waist with fierce affection. You're doing good, Mom, he said seriously. You always make sure I have everything I need, and you read me stories, and you never get mad when I ask too many questions. Victoria's eyes filled with unexpected tears. In her constant striving for perfection, she often lost sight of what she was already doing right. Tyler's simple acceptance, his unwavering faith in her love despite her imperfections, was both a gift and a revelation. Thank you, sweetheart, she whispered, holding him tight. Daniel watched the exchange while sliding pancakes onto plates, something warm and complicated stirring in his chest. There was such genuine love between Victoria and Tyler, such clear devotion beneath her insecurities about her parenting abilities. He thought about Emma's occasional questions about why some kids had mommies and others didn't, her wistful observations about families that looked different from theirs. Pancakes are ready, he announced, carrying plates to the table with a flourish that made both children applaud. The meal that followed was unlike anything Victoria had experienced in years. There was no rushing, no checking phones or mental rehearsal of the day's agenda. Instead, there was Tyler's delighted discovery that pancakes could be cut into fun shapes, Emma's elaborate storytelling about the adventures of Pancake Princess and Syrup Dragon, and the kind of meandering conversation that happened when no one was watching the clock. These are the best pancakes in the universe, Tyler declared through a mouthful of food. Even better than the ones at IHOP. High praise indeed, Daniel said solemnly. IHOP sets quite a standard. Can you teach me how to make them? Tyler asked eagerly. Then I could make breakfast for Mom sometimes. I think that's an excellent idea, Daniel replied, glancing at Victoria. Your mom could help too. It's always more fun with a team. The casual way he included her in future plans, as if there was no question that there would be more mornings like this sent a flutter of something that might have been hope through Victoria's chest. She'd spent so many years focused on professional achievement that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to anticipate simple domestic pleasures. "What do you do for work, Mr. Hayes?" Tyler asked, apparently having exhausted the topic of pancakes and moved on to broader inquiries. Daniel and Victoria exchanged a quick glance. The professional complications of their situation suddenly seemed very present, a reminder that the outside world would eventually intrude on this peaceful bubble they'd created. "I work with your mom," Daniel said carefully. "I'm an engineer. I design systems that help create clean energy." "Like solar panels?" Tyler asked, perking up with interest. "Exactly like solar panels," Daniel confirmed, surprised by the boy's knowledge. "Tyler's very interested in environmental science," Victoria explained. "He's been asking questions about renewable energy since he learned about climate change at school." "Is it true that solar panels can power whole houses?" Tyler asked eagerly. "Even at night?" Daniel's face lit up with enthusiasm. This was clearly a subject he was passionate about, and Tyler's genuine curiosity was the perfect audience for his expertise. "With the right storage systems, absolutely. In fact, I've been working on a project that could make solar energy much more efficient and cost-effective." "Tell me everything," Tyler demanded, leaning forward with rapt attention. For the next 20 minutes, Daniel explained solar energy concepts in terms that an 8-year-old could understand, drawing diagrams on napkins and using Emma's toy blocks to demonstrate energy storage principles. Victoria found herself drawn into the conversation, asking questions of her own as she began to understand the true scope and potential of the project she'd so hastily dismissed. "So your system could actually store excess energy during peak sunlight hours and redistribute it during periods of high demand?" She asked, her business mind automatically calculating the implications. "Exactly," Daniel said, his eyes bright with the passion that had driven him to work countless late nights perfecting his proposal. "And the beauty is that it scales from individual homes to entire neighborhoods to commercial applications. The cost savings alone would be revolutionary," Victoria mused, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to turn breakfast into a business meeting." "It's not a business meeting if we're all still in our pajamas," Emma pointed out with 6-year-old logic, which made Tyler giggle. "Emma has a point," Daniel agreed. "Besides, it's nice to talk about the project with someone who understands the technical implications." Victoria felt that familiar thrill she got when encountering a truly innovative business concept, but this time it was tempered by something else: pride in Daniel's vision. Excitement about the possibility of working together on something meaningful, and underneath it all, a growing awareness of how much she respected this man who could explain complex engineering concepts to children while making perfect pancakes and creating a space where everyone felt valued and heard. "I have an idea," Tyler said, suddenly interrupting her thoughts. "Since you both work on solar energy, and Emma's dad is really smart, and you're really smart too, Mom, why don't you work together? Then you could make the best solar panels ever, and Emma and I could be friends, and everybody would be happy." The innocent suggestion hung in the air, like a challenge to the complicated adult world of professional hierarchies and office politics. Out of the mouths of babes, Victoria thought, remembering how she'd offered Daniel exactly that possibility just hours earlier. "That's not a bad idea," she said, carefully watching Daniel's reaction. "What do you think, Mr. Hayes? Could you see yourself working on a team with your boss?" "I think," Daniel said slowly, "that depends on whether the boss is willing to listen to ideas that might challenge conventional thinking." "And I think," Victoria replied, "that depends on whether the engineer is willing to work with someone who's made some pretty significant mistakes in judgment." "What kind of mistakes?" Emma asked, with the radar for adult subtext that children seem to develop around age 6. Victoria and Daniel looked at each other, and Victoria made a decision that surprised herself with its spontaneity. "Well," she said, "yesterday I was very rude to your daddy at work. I didn't listen carefully to his ideas, and I said some things that hurt his feelings. I was wrong, and I owe him an apology." Emma considered this information seriously. "Did you say you were sorry?" "I did," Victoria confirmed, "and I hope he can forgive me." Emma looked at her father expectantly. Daniel smiled and extended his hand across the table to Victoria in a gesture that was both professional and somehow more intimate than a handshake had any right to be. "Apology accepted," he said formally, then winked at Emma. "Besides, everyone deserves a second chance. Especially if they make really good pancakes," Tyler added, which dissolved any remaining tension in laughter. The morning continued with the kind of easy flow that Victoria hadn't experienced since before her divorce, maybe since before Tyler was born, when life had been less complicated and she'd been less guarded. The children played together while the adults cleaned up the kitchen, working around each other with surprising coordination considering they'd known each other for less than 24 hours. "Your phone has been buzzing," Daniel observed, nodding toward Victoria's purse, where her cell phone was indeed vibrating with increasing urgency. Victoria sighed, reality beginning to intrude on their peaceful bubble. "I should probably check that. The office doesn't usually wait for convenient times to have crises." She retrieved her phone to find 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, and an inbox full of emails marked urgent. Her assistant Margaret had apparently been trying to reach her since 6 a.m. about a presentation that had been moved up, a client meeting that needed rescheduling, and a board member who was demanding immediate answers about the renewable energy division restructuring. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, noting her expression. "Just the usual chaos," Victoria said, scrolling through messages with growing stress. "I was supposed to present revised budget projections to the board this afternoon, but apparently the meeting's been moved to 10 a.m. and I haven't even—" She stopped, looking at Daniel with sudden realization. "Actually, this might be perfect timing." "How so?" "The board wants to know what I'm planning to do with the renewable energy division. Specifically, they want to know how I'm going to turn it into a profit center instead of a resource drain." Daniel's expression grew wary. And I think I'm going to tell them that I've found exactly the right person to lead a revolutionary new initiative that could position Innovatech as the industry leader in residential solar integration." "Victoria," Daniel said carefully, "we talked about this last night, but in the light of day, are you sure you want to stake your professional reputation on defending the project you publicly rejected yesterday?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching Tyler help Emma build an elaborate castle out of couch cushions. Both children were completely absorbed in their collaborative creation, negotiating architectural details with the seriousness of actual engineers. "I've spent the last 5 years making safe decisions," she said finally. "Cutting costs, streamlining operations, minimizing risk. It's served me well professionally, but I'm starting to wonder if playing it safe has cost me more than I realized." She looked at Daniel directly, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "Your project isn't safe, Daniel. It's ambitious and innovative and exactly the kind of long-term investment that could transform the company. But more than that, it's right. It's the kind of work that makes a real difference in the world. And if the board doesn't see it that way—" Victoria's smile was rueful but determined. "Then maybe it's time for me to find a company that shares my values instead of compromising my values to fit the company." The admission surprised them both. Victoria had spent her entire career climbing the corporate ladder, making the strategic moves and difficult decisions that established her reputation as a turnaround specialist. The idea of prioritizing principle over professional advancement was so foreign to her usual mindset that saying it aloud felt like stepping off a cliff. "You'd really do that?" Daniel asked. "Risk your position to support a project that you rejected 24 hours ago?" "I'd do it to support the right project," Victoria corrected, "and the right person to lead it." The conversation was interrupted by Tyler's excited voice calling from the living room. "Mom! Emma! Come see what we built." They walked into the living room to find an impressive fort constructed from couch cushions, dining room chairs, and what appeared to be every blanket in the house. Tyler and Emma stood proudly beside their creation, beaming with the satisfaction of successful collaboration. "It's got 2 rooms," Emma explained, pointing to the architectural features. "One for playing and one for reading, and Tyler made it so the roof won't fall down." "It's an engineering marvel," Daniel said seriously, examining their work with the gravity it deserved. "Very sound structural principles." "Can we play in it some more?" Tyler asked hopefully. "Before we have to go home." Victoria glanced at her phone again, calculating drive time and meeting preparation requirements. The responsible thing would be to leave immediately to focus on damage control and professional obligations. But watching Tyler's face, seeing how relaxed and happy he was, she found herself reluctant to end this interlude of peace. "We do need to leave soon," she said gently, "but maybe we could play for a little while longer." The next hour passed too quickly, filled with elaborate games that required both adult participation and serious commitment to the children's imaginative scenarios. Victoria found herself crawling through blanket tunnels and defending the cushion castle from attacks by stuffed animal dragons, laughing in ways she couldn't remember doing since Tyler was very small. Daniel watched her gradual transformation with fascination and growing tenderness. This was the woman who existed beneath the professional armor, playful and genuinely engaged, quick to laugh and completely present in the moment. He could see why Tyler adored her, could imagine what she might have been like before life taught her to guard her heart so carefully. When it was finally time to leave, the goodbyes were more complex than simple politeness required. The children extracted promises of future playdates, with the persistence that only 8-year-olds possessed, while the adults navigated the more complicated territory of professional and personal possibilities. "I'll call you later today," Victoria said, as Daniel walked them to the car that Margaret had arranged to pick them up. "About the board meeting and about the project leadership position we discussed." "Victoria," Daniel said quietly, "are you absolutely certain about this? Once you present my project to the board as a serious initiative, there's no taking it back. Your professional reputation will be tied to its success or failure." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, then at Tyler, who was already buckled into the car seat and waving enthusiastically at Emma through the window. "Some things are worth the risk," she said simply. "This is one of them." As the car pulled away, Daniel stood in his driveway, with Emma's hand in his, watching, until the taillights disappeared around the corner. The morning sun was higher now, promising a beautiful day after the storm's violence, and the air smelled clean and full of possibility. "I like Tyler," Emma announced, swinging their joined hands contentedly. "And I like his mom, too. She's not really an ice queen at all, is she, Daddy?" "No, sweetheart," Daniel replied, thinking about Victoria's laughter during their cushion fort adventures, the tears in her eyes when Tyler had hugged her, the determined set of her jaw when she'd talked about risking her career for the right principles. "I don't think she's an ice queen at all. I think she's just been waiting for the right reason to let her heart thaw." Back in the car, Tyler chattered excitedly about everything they'd done, everything they'd learned, and all the ways Emma was the best friend he'd ever had. Victoria listened with half her attention, while the other half focused on the meeting ahead, on the arguments she would need to make, on the professional risk she was about to take. But underneath the familiar anxiety about board presentations and corporate politics, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of rightness about her choices, a conviction that she was finally moving in a direction that aligned with her deepest values rather than just her professional ambitions. "Mom," Tyler said suddenly, his chatter pausing, "are we going to see Emma and Mr. Hayes again soon?" "I hope so, sweetheart," Victoria replied, meaning it more than she'd meant anything in a long time. "Good," Tyler said with satisfaction, then returned to his detailed recounting of pancake-making techniques and solar panel science. Victoria smiled and let her son's happiness wash over her as the familiar landscape of their normal life came into view. In a few hours, she would walk into that boardroom and stake her career on a project she'd rejected, defend a man she'd humiliated, and argue for the kind of long-term vision that corporate boards were notoriously skeptical about. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in years, Victoria Cross felt like she was exactly where she belonged, not in spite of the risk, but because of it. Some storms, she was beginning to understand, didn't just clear the air. They cleared the path toward the person you were always meant to become. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of the storm clouds, and somewhere between her sleeping son's contented breathing and the memory of Daniel's quiet strength, Victoria began to believe that ice queens could indeed learn to be warm again. They just needed the right night to show them the way. The Innovatech boardroom felt different this time, though Victoria couldn't quite put her finger on why. Perhaps it was the way the late morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in sharper relief than the artificial lighting had managed the day before. Or perhaps it was simply that she was seeing the familiar space through different eyes that had spent the night watching candlelight flicker across her son's peaceful face and listening to a man speak about principles worth defending. She'd had exactly 47 minutes to prepare for this presentation, after dropping Tyler at school, 47 minutes to shower change into her usual armor of tailored suit and controlled confidence and construct an argument that would either salvage her career or destroy it completely. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was about to defend a project she'd dismissed with such public certainty just 24 hours earlier. The board members filed in with their usual mixture of corporate gravitas and barely concealed impatience. Richard Thornton, the silver-haired chairman, who'd hired her specifically for her reputation as a ruthless cost-cutter, took his seat at the head of the table with the expression of a man expecting to hear exactly what he wanted to hear. Margaret Chen, the only other woman on the board, offered Victoria a supportive nod that somehow managed to convey both solidarity and concern. "Victoria," Thornton began without preamble, "we're here because the renewable energy division continues to hemorrhage money while our competitors are posting record profits in that sector. Yesterday you indicated you had a plan to either turn that division around or eliminate it entirely. Which is it going to be?" Victoria stood at the presentation screen, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. Behind her, Daniel's carefully crafted charts and projections waited to be revealed, the same data she'd dismissed as outdated thinking, now reframed as visionary innovation. "Gentlemen, Margaret," she began, "I'm here to present an opportunity that could position Innovatech as the industry leader in residential solar integration within 18 months. The subtle shift in the room's energy was immediate. They'd expected her to announce cuts and closures, not expansion and investment. The renewable energy division isn't failing because there's no market for our services. Victoria continued, clicking to her first slide. It's failing because we've been approaching that market with incremental improvements instead of revolutionary solutions. She paused, letting that sink in, before revealing Daniel's efficiency projections. The numbers were striking, even to her business-focused mind: 30% increased efficiency, 40% reduced installation costs, scalable from residential to commercial applications. These projections are impressive, board member James Walsh said skeptically. But who developed this technology? I don't recognize the research team. The technology was developed by Daniel Hayes, a senior engineer in our renewable division. Victoria replied, surprised by how easily his name came to her lips. How naturally she shifted into advocacy mode. He's been working on solar integration algorithms that could revolutionize how we approach energy storage and distribution. Hayes, Thornton mused, consulting his notes. Isn't he the employee you were planning to reevaluate? Victoria felt heat creep up her neck, but she maintained her composure. He is. And that was a mistake on my part, a significant one that could have cost us the most innovative project our renewable division has ever produced. The admission of error hung in the boardroom air like smoke after an explosion. CEOs of Victoria's caliber didn't typically confess to mistakes in front of boards of directors, especially not mistakes made not less than 24 hours earlier. Victoria, Margaret Chen said carefully, help us understand what changed between yesterday and today. Victoria had anticipated this question during her hurried preparation, but she still found herself hesitating. How could she explain that a storm had stranded her at the home of a man she'd humiliated, that watching him make pancakes for their children had somehow revealed the short-sightedness of her business strategy? How could she describe the way his quiet integrity had illuminated her own professional compromises? I took the time to thoroughly review Hayes's complete proposal instead of just the executive summary, she said, which was true even if it wasn't the complete truth. What I discovered was a comprehensive approach to solar integration that addresses every major obstacle currently limiting residential adoption. She clicked through Daniel's technical specifications, his market analysis, his projected implementation timeline. With each slide, she felt her confidence growing, not because she was delivering a polished presentation, but because she was finally advocating for something she genuinely believed in. The initial investment would be substantial, she acknowledged, approximately $12 million over the first year for research and development, team expansion, and pilot program implementation. But the projected returns are equally substantial. Conservative estimates show we could capture 15% of the residential solar market within 3 years. 15% seems optimistic, Walsh interjected. What makes you think we can compete with established players like Tesla and SunPower? Because they're not offering what Hayes has developed, Victoria replied with conviction that surprised even her. They're selling solar panels and hoping customers figure out the rest. Hayes's system is a complete energy management solution that thinks ahead, stores efficiently, and adapts to usage patterns in real time. She realized as she spoke that she was no longer just reciting technical specifications. She was sharing Daniel's vision as she'd come to understand it. His passion for creating technology that could actually make a difference had somehow become infectious even in the sterile environment of corporate decision-making. And you're confident Hayes can deliver on these projections? Thornton asked. I'm confident that dismissing his vision would be the biggest strategic error this company could make, Victoria said firmly. The renewable energy market isn't going to wait for us to catch up. We can either lead this innovation or watch our competitors profit from our hesitation. The room fell silent as the board members absorbed her presentation. Victoria could see them calculating risks and potential rewards weighing her track record against the boldness of what she was proposing. "What exactly are you asking from us?" Thornton finally said. "Full funding for Hayes's project, complete autonomy for his research team, and the authority to restructure the renewable division around his solar integration model," Victoria replied without hesitation. "I'm also recommending that Hayes be promoted to Director of Renewable Innovation with full authority over project development and implementation." "That's a significant promotion for someone you were planning to terminate yesterday," Margaret observed. "Yesterday, I was thinking like a cost-cutting specialist," Victoria admitted. "Today, I'm thinking like a CEO who wants to build something that lasts." The honesty in her voice was unmistakable, and Victoria saw several board members exchange glances that suggested her candor was making an impression. "We'll need to see detailed budget projections," Walsh said finally, "and a comprehensive risk assessment." "Of course," Victoria agreed. "I can have those to you by end of business today." "And Hayes," Thornton asked, "is he aware that his future with the company depends on the success of this project?" Victoria thought about Daniel standing in his kitchen that morning, his face bright with enthusiasm, as he explained solar energy concepts to Tyler. She thought about his quiet strength, his willingness to open his door to someone who'd wronged him, his belief that people deserved second chances, even when they hadn't earned them. "Hayes knows exactly what's at stake," she said, "and I have complete confidence in his ability to deliver results." The board voted to approve a preliminary budget for research and development contingent on detailed projections and Hayes's acceptance of the position. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out with their usual mixture of cautious optimism and skeptical concern, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, pride in a decision that aligned with her values, rather than just her professional advancement. Margaret lingered as the room emptied, studying Victoria with the sharp attention that had made her such a valuable board member. "That was either brilliant or career suicide," Margaret said bluntly. "I'm not sure which." "Probably both," Victoria admitted. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm moving in the right direction." "What really happened between yesterday and today?" Margaret asked. "Because that presentation wasn't just about reconsidering a project proposal. That was about reconsidering your entire approach to leadership." Victoria was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain a transformation that she was still trying to understand herself. "Sometimes," she said finally, "you need to see yourself through someone else's eyes to realize who you've become versus who you want to be." Margaret nodded, as if that explanation made perfect sense. "And Hayes, what's he like when he's not being publicly humiliated in boardrooms?" Victoria's smile was soft and complicated. "He's exactly the kind of person I used to be before I learned to prioritize efficiency over empathy." "Sounds like he made quite an impression." "He did," Victoria agreed, then gathered her materials with renewed purpose. "Now I need to call him and find out if he's willing to stake his career on a partnership with someone who's made some pretty significant mistakes in judgment." The drive to Daniel's house felt different in daylight, the route she'd traveled so desperately the night before, now revealing itself as a series of conscious choices rather than storm-driven necessity. She'd called ahead this time, and Daniel had agreed to meet despite the short notice and the complicated nature of their professional relationship. He answered the door, still wearing the casual clothes from their morning pancake adventure, his hair slightly mussed and his expression cautiously hopeful. Behind him, Victoria could hear Emma chattering to herself in the living room, apparently engaged in an elaborate conversation with her stuffed animals about castle architecture. "How did it go?" Daniel asked, stepping aside to let her enter. "Better than I had any right to expect," Victoria replied, then paused in the entryway, suddenly aware of how this might look, the CEO of Innovatech, arriving unannounced at an employee's home in the middle of a weekday. "I hope you don't mind me coming by instead of calling." This conversation felt too important for the phone. "Of course," Daniel said, leading her to the kitchen where coffee was already brewing. Emma's on a conference call with her stuffed animals about proper fort construction techniques, so we should have privacy. Victoria accepted a cup of coffee, gratefully wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic, much as she had the night before. The domestic familiarity of the gesture should have felt strange, but instead, it felt like a kind of homecoming. "The board approved preliminary funding," she said without preamble, "contingent on detailed budget projections and your acceptance of a significantly expanded role." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "What kind of expanded role?" "Director of Renewable Innovation," Victoria replied, watching his face carefully. "Full authority over project development, team selection, and implementation strategy. Essentially, you'd be running the entire renewable division as your own research and development laboratory." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it contained answers to questions he was still formulating. "That's a substantial promotion," he said finally. "It's a substantial responsibility," Victoria corrected. "Your project would become the cornerstone of Innovatech's entire renewable energy strategy. If it succeeds, you'll be credited with revolutionizing our approach to sustainable technology. If it fails, we both go down together," Daniel finished. "Is that what you're saying?" Victoria met his eyes directly. "That's exactly what I'm saying. I staked my professional reputation on your vision this morning, Daniel. The board is giving us one chance to prove that innovation and principle can coexist with profitability. And you're confident they can." "I'm confident that you can make them," Victoria replied with conviction that surprised them both. "I've seen your passion for this work, your understanding of both the technical and market aspects. More importantly, I've seen your integrity. You're not going to compromise the project's potential for short-term gains." Daniel stood and moved to the window, looking out at his backyard, where the previous night's storm had left evidence of its passage in scattered leaves and broken branches. When he turned back to Victoria, his expression was serious but determined. "I have conditions," he said. "Name them." "First, I want complete transparency about budget allocation and timeline expectations. No surprise deadline changes or funding cuts without full consultation." "Agreed." "Second, I choose my own team. If we're going to revolutionize renewable energy, I need people who share the vision, not just employees who follow orders." "Agreed." "And third," Daniel paused, his voice softening slightly, "whatever happens between us professionally can't affect Tyler and Emma's friendship. They've found something special, and I won't have our adult complications interfere with that." Victoria felt her heart squeeze at his concern for their children's happiness. "That's not a professional condition, Daniel. That's a promise between parents, and you have my word." Daniel nodded, then extended his hand across the kitchen island. "Then I accept. Director Hayes at your service." Victoria shook his hand, but instead of the brief professional contact she'd expected, Daniel's fingers lingered against hers. The touch sent an unexpected jolt of awareness through her, a reminder that the connection building between them was about more than just business partnerships and parenting alliances. "There's something else," Daniel said quietly, not releasing her hand. "Something I need to say before we dive into project planning and budget meetings." "What's that?" "Thank you," he said simply, "for taking the risk, for believing in the project, for seeing potential where I'd started to see only rejection. What you did today, defending work you'd dismissed, admitting error to your board, putting your career on the line for someone else's vision, that took courage I'm not sure I would have had." Victoria felt tears threaten at the genuine gratitude in his voice. "You would have had it," she said with certainty. "You already showed it. You opened your door to someone who'd wronged you, offered shelter without expecting anything in return, treated my son with kindness he didn't know he was missing. If that's not courage, I don't know what is." They stood there in the afternoon sunlight streaming through his kitchen windows, hands still joined, both aware that something significant was shifting between them. The professional partnership they'd agreed to was built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values, but underneath that foundation was something more personal, more complicated, and infinitely more precious. "Victoria," Daniel said softly, "I need you to know that whatever develops between us personally, it won't compromise my professional judgment. Your project will succeed or fail on its own merits, not because of any feelings I might have for you." The admission that he had feelings for her hung in the air between them, like a bridge they weren't quite ready to cross. Victoria felt her pulse quicken, her carefully maintained professional boundaries blurring in ways that were both thrilling and terrifying. "And I need you to know," she replied, "that whatever my feelings might be, I'll never use my position to pressure you into anything beyond what you freely choose to give." "So we understand each other," Daniel said. "We understand each other," Victoria agreed. They released hands reluctantly, both aware that they were entering uncharted territory, where professional collaboration and personal attraction would have to coexist in ways that could either strengthen their partnership or complicate it beyond repair. "Ms. Cross, Ms. Cross." Emma's voice interrupted their moment as she came running into the kitchen, her face bright with excitement. "I drew a picture of you and Tyler and me and Daddy at our pancake breakfast. Want to see?" Victoria knelt down to Emma's level, accepting the drawing with the seriousness it deserved. The picture showed 4 stick figures around a table, all with enormous smiles, and what appeared to be very elaborate pancakes. But what caught Victoria's attention was the way Emma had drawn them, not as separate individuals, but as a family unit connected by carefully drawn hands holding across the table. "This is beautiful, Emma," Victoria said softly. "You captured the morning perfectly." "I'm going to make one for Tyler, too," Emma announced, "so he can remember our first sleepover." "I'm sure he'd love that," Victoria replied, thinking about Tyler's excited chatter on the drive to school, his detailed plans for future adventures with his new best friend. "Are you going to work with Daddy now?" Emma asked, with the directness that children wielded like a superpower. "Tyler said you're really smart about business, and Daddy's really smart about solar panels, so together you could probably solve everything." Daniel and Victoria exchanged a glance over Emma's head, both struck by the simple wisdom of childhood logic. "We're going to try," Victoria said. "Your daddy has some amazing ideas that could help a lot of people." "Of course he does," Emma said with complete confidence in her father's abilities. "Daddy's the smartest person in the whole world. Well, except maybe for Tyler's mom, because Tyler says you know everything about everything." The innocent comparison made Victoria laugh despite herself. "Tyler might be slightly biased in my favor." "That's what makes it true," Emma said seriously. "The people who love you the most see you the best." The profound simplicity of that statement hit both adults with unexpected force. Victoria thought about Tyler's unwavering faith in her competence, despite her insecurities, about the way his love saw past her professional armor to the mother who read bedtime stories and worried about his happiness. And she thought about Daniel's willingness to see potential for warmth in someone who'd been called the Ice Queen, his belief that people could change even when they'd given little evidence of their capacity for growth. "Emma," Daniel said gently, "why don't you go work on Tyler's picture while Ms. Cross and I talk about some grown-up business things?" "Okay," Emma agreed readily. But remember that working together is more fun than working alone. That's what me and Tyler figured out about fort building. As Emma skipped back to the living room, Victoria and Daniel settled at the kitchen table with their coffee and the weight of decisions that would affect far more than just their professional futures. "She's remarkable," Victoria said, watching Emma through the doorway as she settled at her small art table with intense concentration. "You've raised an extraordinary little girl." "She's had to grow up faster than I would have liked," Daniel replied, his voice carrying the familiar ache of a parent who'd had to navigate loss alongside his child. "But she has Sarah's resilience and optimism. Sometimes I think she's handling our situation better than I am." "Children often do," Victoria observed. "Tyler's adapted to our unconventional family structure with more grace than I have. He's never once complained about having a working mother or an absent father. He just accepts love where he finds it and keeps moving forward." "Speaking of Tyler," Daniel said, "he left something here this morning." He retrieved a small soccer ball from the entryway, holding it up with a smile. He was so excited about everything that happened, he forgot his favorite ball. Emma suggested we could return it this weekend, maybe combine it with a trip to the Science Museum Tyler mentioned wanting to visit. Victoria felt a flutter of something that might have been domestic contentment at the casual way Daniel included her and Tyler in weekend plans. He would love that. And the Science Museum has an excellent renewable energy exhibit that I think you'd find interesting. "A professional consultation disguised as a family outing?" Daniel asked with amusement. "The best kind," Victoria replied, then caught herself. "I mean, if you're comfortable with family outings. I don't want to assume—" "Victoria," Daniel interrupted gently. "After last night, and this morning, I think we're past the point of formal assumptions. We're two single parents whose children have decided they're best friends and whose professional lives are now inextricably linked. If that's not grounds for informal family activities, I don't know what is." "You make it sound so simple," Victoria said with wonder. "In my world, everything has complications and ramifications and potential consequences to consider." "And in my world," Daniel replied, "the most important decisions are often the simplest ones, like whether to open your door when someone needs help, or whether to trust someone who's shown you their genuine heart, or whether to say yes when happiness offers itself without guarantees." Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of defenses she'd maintained for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without their weight. "Is that what this is, happiness offering itself?" Daniel's smile was soft and sure. "I think it might be. The question is whether we're brave enough to say yes." Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Board-approved preliminary funding. Need detailed projections by Friday. Also, whatever you did to change Thornton's mind about innovation investment, do it again. He's actually excited about something for the first time in months." Victoria showed Daniel the message, and they both laughed at the irony of corporate approval arriving just as they were navigating the much more complex territory of personal feelings. "I suppose we should start working on those projections," Daniel said, though he made no move to reach for his laptop. "We should," Victoria agreed, also making no movement toward her briefcase. "But first, I think Emma has the right idea about working together being more fun than working alone." "And in what way?" "Well," Victoria said, her professional mask slipping away entirely as she met Daniel's eyes. "I was thinking that if we're going to revolutionize renewable energy and navigate whatever this is between us, we might need to start with the foundation Emma and Tyler figured out." "Which is to trust," Victoria said simply. "The willingness to build something together without knowing exactly how it's going to turn out." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand again this time, with clear intention rather than professional courtesy. I can work with that foundation. So can I, Victoria replied, intertwining their fingers with a sense of rightness that had nothing to do with business strategy and everything to do with the recognition that some partnerships were worth whatever risks they might entail. Outside, the afternoon sun continued its arc across the clear sky, and in the living room, Emma hummed contentedly as she drew pictures of families that looked nothing like traditional structures, but everything like love. In the kitchen, two adults who'd learned to guard their hearts began the careful, brave work of learning to trust again, not just in each other, but in the possibility that storms sometimes cleared the way for exactly the kind of happiness they'd stopped believing they deserved. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain, but full of potential, like a renewable energy system waiting to be built, or a family waiting to be born, from the simple willingness to say yes to connection, yes to risk, and yes to the kind of love that could transform ice queens and brave knights into something even better, real people choosing each other one brave moment at a time. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of intensive planning sessions, late-night phone calls, and the kind of collaborative energy that Daniel had dreamed of but never experienced in a corporate environment. Victoria proved to be everything he'd hoped for in a business partner, brilliant, decisive, and utterly committed to seeing his vision become reality. But more than that, she proved to be someone he looked forward to seeing every morning, someone whose laughter had become as essential to his daily routine as coffee. They established a rhythm that worked around their children's schedules and the demands of transforming an entire corporate division. Morning meetings at Daniel's kitchen table while Emma and Tyler ate breakfast together, afternoon strategy sessions at Victoria's office, while the children did homework in the conference room, evening calls after bedtime stories had been read, and small faces had been kissed goodnight. The solar integration project was progressing beyond Daniel's most optimistic projections. His team carefully selected individuals who shared his passion for sustainable innovation, had embraced the challenge with infectious enthusiasm. The pilot program installations were generating efficiency data that exceeded even their ambitious targets, and preliminary market research suggested demand would far outstrip their initial production capacity. But it was the smaller moments that truly marked the transformation taking place in all their lives. Tyler teaching Emma the rules of soccer in Daniel's backyard, while Victoria and Daniel reviewed budget projections on the back porch. Emma showing Tyler how to make the perfect pancake, while their parents debated implementation timelines over coffee. Family dinners that happened without formal planning. Homework sessions that turned into fort-building adventures, bedtime stories that featured brave knights and reformed ice queens finding their way to happiness. 3 months after that storm-soaked night, Victoria found herself standing in Daniel's kitchen on a Saturday morning, watching him teach both children how to make his grandmother's famous cinnamon rolls, while she attempted to contribute by reading ingredients from a recipe card, covered in Emma's careful additions and corrections. "Mom, you're supposed to measure the flour, not just pour it," Tyler said, with the patience of a child who'd learned to manage his mother's culinary enthusiasm. "Measuring is for people who lack confidence," Victoria replied with mock dignity, though she dutifully returned to the measuring cups under Emma's supervisory gaze. "Mrs. Patterson says measuring is for people who want their food to taste good," Emma pointed out, with 6-year-old logic that was difficult to argue with. "Mrs. Patterson is a wise woman," Daniel agreed, sliding behind Victoria to reach the vanilla extract, his hand brushing her waist, in a gesture that was becoming wonderfully familiar. "But your mom is learning fast. Remember her first attempt at scrambled eggs?" "Those weren't scrambled eggs," Tyler said seriously. "Those were scrambled something else. They were scrambled with love," Victoria protested, laughing at the memory of her first disastrous attempt at breakfast preparation 2 weeks earlier. "Love doesn't make eggs less burned, Mom," Tyler replied with devastating 8-year-old honesty. The easy teasing, the comfortable physical proximity, the assumption of shared future mornings. It all felt as natural as breathing now, though Victoria could still remember the careful distance they'd maintained in those first weeks of professional partnership. They'd been so determined to keep their business relationship separate from whatever was developing personally that they'd practically needed written agreements about appropriate workplace behavior. That careful separation had lasted exactly until the evening Daniel had called to discuss a technical specification issue and ended up staying on the phone for 3 hours, talking about everything except work. Or until the morning Victoria had arrived at his house for their scheduled meeting, to find him dealing with a sick Emma, and had instinctively taken charge of fever medication and comfort measures while he handled the client call that couldn't be postponed. Somewhere in the space between professional collaboration and personal connection, they'd stopped trying to categorize their relationship and simply started living it. "Daniel," one Victoria said, accepting the perfectly rolled cinnamon creation he handed her, "I have something I need to tell you." The serious tone in her voice made him look up from the baking sheet, his expression shifting from domestic contentment to concern. "Everything okay?" "More than okay," Victoria replied, her smile growing as she saw his worry. "Richard Thornton called yesterday. The board wants to expand the renewable division into a separate subsidiary with you as Chief Technology Officer and me as CEO." Daniel's hands stilled on the counter. "A separate subsidiary, our own company essentially," Victoria explained, her excitement barely contained. "Full autonomy, independent budget, complete control over research and development direction. They want to position us as the innovation arm of Innovatech, with the freedom to pursue long-term vision without quarterly profit pressure." "That's incredible," Daniel said slowly, the magnitude of the offer still sinking in. "That's everything we've talked about, and more." "It is," Victoria agreed. "The only question is whether you're ready to be business partners in the most official sense possible." Daniel looked around his kitchen at Tyler helping Emma measure brown sugar with intense concentration, at Victoria's coffee mug sitting next to his own on the counter, at the domestic chaos of a life that had somehow become beautifully, impossibly complete. "I can't think of anyone I'd rather build a company with," he said honestly. "Or anyone I'd rather build a life with." The admission hung in the air between them, more significant than any business proposal, more binding than any corporate contract. They'd been dancing around the deeper conversation for weeks, both aware that what was growing between them had implications that extended far beyond professional partnership. "Even if it means dealing with me as your boss again?" Victoria asked with a smile that held just a trace of uncertainty. "Especially then," Daniel replied, moving closer. "Though I think we've established that our best work happens when we're equal partners in everything." "Everything?" Victoria asked, her voice soft with possibility. "Everything." Daniel confirmed, his hands finding hers, despite the flour and cinnamon sugar that covered them both. "Are you guys going to kiss?" Emma asked, with the directness that made adult conversations impossible to conduct privately. "Emma," Tyler said, clearly embarrassed by his friend's lack of filter. "You can't just ask people that." "Why not?" Emma replied reasonably. "They look like they want to. And Mrs. Patterson says that when grown-ups look at each other like that, kissing usually comes next. Mrs. Patterson has very definite opinions about adult relationships," Daniel said, though he made no move to step away from Victoria. "Mrs. Patterson is usually right about these things." Victoria observed, her eyes sparkling with amusement and something deeper. "She is," Daniel agreed, and leaned down to kiss Victoria with the kind of tenderness that spoke of careful consideration and absolute certainty. The kiss was gentle and sweet, and tasted like cinnamon and possibility. When they separated, both children were watching with expressions of satisfaction, as if they'd been waiting for their parents to catch up to something they'd understood from the beginning. "Finally," Tyler said with the exaggerated patience of youth, "we've been waiting forever for you guys to figure that out." "Forever being approximately 3 months," Daniel said with amusement. "That's like a year in kid time," Emma pointed out. "We were starting to think you needed more help." "What kind of help?" Victoria asked, curious about what kind of matchmaking 8-year-olds might devise. "Tyler had a plan," Emma announced with obvious pride in her friend's strategic thinking. "Tell them about the museum plan." Tyler's cheeks flushed slightly. "It wasn't a plan exactly. I just thought that if we went to the science museum together, and then maybe had lunch somewhere, and then went to the park, you guys would have to talk to each other for a really long time, and you'd figure out that you like each other. That's actually a very sophisticated understanding of relationship development," Victoria said seriously. "You might have a future in strategic planning." "Or matchmaking," Daniel added, "which might be more lucrative." "I don't know what matchmaking is," Tyler said, "but I know that when people are happy, they smile more. And you both smile a lot more now than you used to." The simple observation hit both adults with unexpected force. It was true, Victoria could feel the difference in her own face, the way her expressions had relaxed into something softer and more genuine. She'd stopped checking her reflection for signs of professional vulnerability and started noticing whether she looked happy instead. "You know what?" Victoria said, looking around at the 4 of them, covered in flour and cinnamon sugar, standing in a kitchen that smelled like home and possibility. "I think we should celebrate." "Celebrate what?" Emma asked. "Everything," Victoria replied. "The new company, the successful project, the fact that Tyler's matchmaking plan worked better than he probably expected." "How do we celebrate?" Daniel asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer would involve some kind of adventure. "Ice cream for breakfast," Victoria announced, which made both children cheer with delight. "And then the science museum, and then lunch somewhere that serves actual food, and then whatever other activities our expert consultants recommend." "The park," Emma said immediately, "and the bookstore, and maybe the place that has the really good hot chocolate." "That's a lot for one day," Daniel pointed out mildly. "We have a lot to celebrate," Victoria replied, and realized as she said it that she meant more than just the business success or even the personal breakthrough. She meant the unexpected gift of a family that had formed around kitchen tables and storm-driven necessity around shared values and the willingness to be vulnerable enough to change. The day unfolded exactly as their expert consultants had recommended, with the addition of several detours that only children could have suggested. The Science Museum's renewable energy exhibit provided the perfect opportunity for Daniel to explain his innovations in terms that fascinated both Tyler and Emma, while Victoria found herself genuinely enjoying the interactive displays that demonstrated scientific principles through play. "Look," Tyler called from across the exhibit hall, pointing excitedly at a solar panel display. "It's just like what your dad explained, Emma. The sun hits the panel and makes electricity that gets stored in the battery. And then the electricity can power lights and computers and everything." Emma added, clearly proud of her newly acquired expertise. "My dad says that someday most houses will make their own electricity this way." "Your dad is very smart," Tyler said, with the admiration of a child who'd found a genuine hero. "So is your mom," Emma replied loyally. "She knows all about business and making companies and stuff." Victoria and Daniel exchanged glances over their children's heads, both struck by the way Emma and Tyler had unconsciously adopted each other's parents as additional sources of security and pride. The easy way Tyler sought Daniel's approval for his scientific observations, the casual way Emma turned to Victoria for guidance about navigating the museum's interactive displays, it spoke to connections that went beyond friendship to something that looked remarkably like family. Lunch at the recommended restaurant became an exercise in negotiation as the children debated the merits of various menu options with the seriousness of international diplomats. Tyler advocated strongly for the grilled cheese sandwich because it's classic, while Emma made a compelling case for the chicken strips because they come with 3 different dipping sauces. "We could share," Tyler suggested with the kind of compromise that made Victoria's heart squeeze with pride. "Half grilled cheese and half chicken strips." "That's perfect," Emma agreed immediately. "And we can share the dipping sauces, too." "Sharing is definitely the way to go," Daniel said, glancing meaningfully at Victoria. "Some of the best things in life work better when they're shared." "Like families," Emma said matter-of-factly, apparently having decided that philosophy was an appropriate lunch conversation topic. "Tyler shares his mom with me, and I share my dad with him, and everybody has more people to love them." "Is that how you see it?" Victoria asked, gently curious about how these remarkable children were processing the changes in their lives. "That's how it is," Tyler said, with the certainty of childhood. "Before it was just me and Mom and Emma and her dad. Now it's all of us together." "That's better, right?" "Much better." Victoria agreed, her voice thick with emotion she didn't try to hide. The park portion of their celebration revealed itself to be less about organized activities and more about the simple pleasure of watching Tyler teach Emma soccer techniques, while Victoria and Daniel sat on a bench and marveled at how completely their lives had been transformed by a storm that had seemed like disaster just 3 months earlier. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your car hadn't broken down that night?" Daniel asked, his fingers intertwined with Victoria's as they watched their children play. "I try not to," Victoria replied honestly. "I think I would have eventually recognized the value of your project, but I'm not sure I would have ever recognized the value of changing my entire approach to life. The storm forced me to see possibilities I'd been too afraid to consider. And now I'm not afraid anymore," Victoria said, turning to meet his eyes. "At least not of the important things. I'm still terrified of parallel parking and anything involving yeast in cooking, but the big fears about whether I can be the mother Tyler deserves, whether I can balance professional success with personal happiness, whether I can trust someone enough to build a real partnership don't keep me awake at night anymore." "What does keep you awake at night?" Daniel asked with the smile that had become one of her favorite sights in the world. "Planning," Victoria admitted with a laugh. "I lie awake thinking about the subsidiary launch, about Tyler's science fair project, about whether we should paint Emma's room the color she's been requesting, about what kind of vacation 4 people take together." "4 people?" Daniel asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Well," Victoria said, suddenly feeling shy despite everything they'd shared, "I've been thinking that maybe it's time to make some of these arrangements more official. Not just the business partnership." Daniel's smile was radiant. "What kind of official are we talking about?" "The kind where Tyler and Emma don't have to negotiate custody schedules to see each other," Victoria replied. "The kind where we stop pretending we're not building something permanent. The kind where ice queens and brave knights get there happily ever after." "I like that kind of official," Daniel said softly. "Though I think we've moved beyond fairy tale categories. Ice queens and brave knights are fictional. What we're building is real." "What are we building?" Victoria asked, though she thought she knew the answer. A family, Daniel said simply. The kind that's chosen rather than assigned, built on shared values and genuine affection, and the willingness to weather storms together. Before Victoria could respond, Tyler came running over from the soccer field, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. "Mom, Daniel, you have to see what Emma taught me about corner kicks," he said breathlessly. "She's really good at soccer strategy. I learned from watching Tyler's games," Emma said, following more sedately, but with obvious pride in her students' enthusiasm. "Strategy is just thinking about what might happen next, and being ready for it." "That's excellent wisdom," Victoria said, struck once again by the way children could distill complex concepts into simple truths. Being ready for what happens next is pretty much the key to everything. "Are you ready for what happens next?" Daniel asked quietly, his question carrying weight beyond Tyler's soccer development. Victoria looked around at the perfect autumn afternoon at Tyler and Emma, already planning their next adventure, at Daniel, whose quiet strength had become the foundation for possibilities she'd never imagined. 6 months ago, she'd been the ice queen of corporate America, focused solely on professional advancement and protecting herself from any vulnerability that might compromise her carefully constructed success. Now she was a woman in love, a mother learning to balance ambition with presence, a partner in both business and life with a man who'd taught her that the best kind of strength came from the willingness to be open rather than defended. "I'm ready," she said with absolute certainty, "for all of it. The new company, the shared life, the challenges we haven't even thought of yet. I'm ready to build something that lasts. Even if it means giving up your reputation as the Ice Queen," Daniel asked with gentle teasing. "Especially then," Victoria replied. "Ice Queens are lonely and cold and ultimately fictional. I'd rather be a real woman with a real family and the kind of love that makes everything else feel possible." As if summoned by their conversation, both children appeared at their bench with the coordinated timing that suggested careful planning. "We have an announcement," Emma said, with the seriousness of a corporate executive delivering quarterly projections. "Tyler and I have been talking," Emma continued, "and we think you guys should get married. Not just because we want to be siblings," Tyler added quickly, "but because you're really happy together and marriage is what people do when they want to be a family forever. Plus," Emma said pragmatically, "it would make holiday planning much easier." Victoria and Daniel looked at each other over their children's heads, both recognizing the wisdom hidden in 8-year-old logic and the simplicity of love that didn't need complicated justifications. "What do you think?" Daniel asked Victoria, his voice soft with possibility. "Ready for one more new beginning. With you." Victoria replied, her heart full of certainty and joy and the kind of happiness she'd stopped believing was possible. "I'm ready for all the new beginnings we can create." The proposal that followed was nothing like the elaborate romantic gestures Victoria had seen in movies or read about in novels. It was Daniel kneeling on the grass beside a park bench, while 2 children cheered and clapped, offering not just his love, but his complete partnership in building the kind of life that honored both their individual dreams and their shared commitment to creating something beautiful together. "Victoria Cross," he said, his voice carrying all the warmth and certainty that had drawn her to him from that first storm-soaked night. "Will you marry me? Will you be my business partner and life partner and co-conspirator in raising these 2 remarkable kids who clearly have better relationship instincts than either of us?" "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation, her answer carrying the weight of every risk she'd been afraid to take and every possibility she'd been brave enough to embrace. Yes to all of it. Yes to the marriage and the partnership and the adventure of figuring out how to blend solar energy innovation with soccer practice schedules. The kiss that sealed their engagement tasted like autumn air and shared laughter and the kind of promise that could weather any storm. When they separated, both children were beaming with the satisfaction of successful matchmakers and the excitement of siblings-to-be. "When's the wedding?" Tyler asked, with the practical concern of a child already invested in the logistics of family formation. "Soon," Victoria said, looking at Daniel with eyes bright with love and possibility. "But not too soon. We want to make sure we do this right." "What does doing it right look like?" Emma asked with genuine curiosity. "It looks like making sure everyone feels included," Daniel replied thoughtfully. "It looks like creating a celebration that honors what we're building together, not just two people getting married, but four people becoming a family." "Can we help plan it?" Tyler asked hopefully. "We wouldn't dream of planning it without you," Victoria assured him. "After all, you two are the ones who figured out we belonged together before we did." As the afternoon sun began to set, and they made their way back to the car, Victoria found herself thinking about fairy tales and happy endings. The story that had begun with professional humiliation and storm-driven desperation had transformed into something that felt too real and too right to be fiction. Ice queens, she reflected, were creatures of isolation and defense ruling from crystal palaces that protected them from pain but also prevented them from joy. But real women, real mothers and partners and leaders lived in the messy, complicated, beautiful world where storms could bring unexpected gifts and brave knights turned out to be gentle engineers who made pancakes and believed in second chances. 6 months later, Victoria Cross Hayes stood in the backyard of their newly purchased home watching her husband explain photovoltaic principles to a group of neighborhood children, while Emma and Tyler served as his enthusiastic teaching assistants. The solar panels on their roof prototypes from their thriving subsidiary caught the afternoon sun and converted it into clean energy that powered their life together. The wedding had been everything they'd dreamed, intimate and joyful, celebrating not just their love, but the family they'd created from storms and second chances. Tyler had walked Victoria down the aisle while Emma served as Daniel's best woman, and the vows they'd exchanged had spoken not just of love between partners, but of commitment to the children who'd brought them together, and the values that would guide their shared future. Cross Hayes Renewable Solutions was exceeding every projection they'd dared to hope for, with installations across 3 states and interest from national developers who wanted to license Daniel's innovations. But more than professional success, they'd built something that felt sustainable in the deepest sense, a life grounded in love and respect, and the daily choice to see the best in each other. "Mom," Tyler called from across the yard, interrupting her reflections. "Dad says dinner's ready." "Dad." The word still made Victoria's heart squeeze with joy, just as it had the first time Tyler had used it 3 weeks after the wedding. Daniel had actually cried when Tyler had asked if it would be okay to call him Dad now that they were officially family. "Coming?" Victoria called back, gathering up the project plans she'd been reviewing and heading toward the house where the sounds of domestic chaos and contentment waited. Emma was setting the table with her usual careful attention to detail, while Tyler helped Daniel transfer what appeared to be a very successful attempt at homemade pizza from oven to cutting board. The scene was so perfectly, wonderfully ordinary that Victoria had to pause in the doorway to absorb the miracle of it. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, noting her expression. "Everything's perfect," Victoria replied, and meant it completely. "I was just thinking about storms." "What about them?" Emma asked, always ready to engage with whatever philosophical direction the conversation might take. "I was thinking about how they clear the air," Victoria said, accepting the slice of pizza Daniel handed her and settling into her chair at their family table. "How they wash everything clean and make space for new things to grow. Like us." Tyler said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that 8-year-olds possessed in abundance. The storm brought you to our house and now we're all together. Like us, Victoria agreed, looking around at the 3 people who'd taught her that the best kind of strength came not from walls and armor, but from the courage to remain open to love even when it arrived in the most unexpected forms. Outside, the Texas sky was clear and full of stars beginning to emerge in the deepening twilight. Inside, a family built from storms and second chances shared pizza and laughter and the kind of ordinary magic that transformed ice queens into women who knew how to be warm. The fairy tale, Victoria realized, hadn't ended with happily ever after. It had ended with happily ever after, beginning with the recognition that the most beautiful stories weren't about perfect people finding perfect love, but about real people choosing each other daily, building something that could weather any storm, and creating space for all the love they were brave enough to give and receive. Some storms destroyed, but others, like the one that had driven her to Daniel's door on that desperate night, cleared the way for exactly the kind of happiness worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth sharing with anyone brave enough to believe that ice queens could learn to be warm and brave. Nights could be gentle, and real love could transform everything. It touched one perfect ordinary moment at a time.